Hi, my name is Scott the Miniature Maniac, and today we're going to see if we can speed paint even faster. What up, mini family? So some time ago I made a video about speed painting, and it was me recounting my lessons that I learned from a class at Adepticon that was taught by Rafaela Pica. And I've been practicing my speed painting ever since, and I've kind of come up with a different way to speed paint and maybe save some more time. So I'm going to paint two miniatures with the same scheme using the old method and using the new method, and I'm going to compare the timings to see if we can get a similar result while spending significantly less time. Let's get it on. Okay, an hour and 37 minutes and 7 seconds later, I have a completed speed painted miniature. Now I'm going to speed paint the exact same miniature again using a very similar palette, breaking the rules, trying a different process, and bringing you guys along for the ride. And then at the end, we're going to figure out which one looks better and which one took longer. So instead of doing a zenithal undercoat for this model, what I'm going to do first is start with a white undercoat. Then for the parts that I want to be white, I'm going to wash them with Seraphim Sepia. Then while that wash dries, I'm going to base coat the bottom skirt portion, that desaturated blue, and then wash it with a blue wash. And then while that wash dries, I'm going to start on the skin tone and also wash that. The idea with this approach is that I'm never going to spend time hitting the model with a hairdryer to dry it and spending time that way. Instead, I'll just move on to a different part of the model. Also, using different colored washes allows me to get more distinct parts of the miniature because not everything is being pulled together by one singular color of a wash. It's getting a unique treatment for each part. And then from there, it's the exact same process as the previous one. I'm going to highlight the details that are closest to the face, spending the most time on the face because that is the thing that people tend to look at the most when they first pick up a model. Really, the big time saver is not having to spend so much time with the undercoat and creating that zenithal airbrushing highlight to draw people to the face. You're just using the airbrush for a prime job and then doing the rest of it with a paintbrush. Something I want you to notice, especially when I'm base coating the hair, is that the color that I'm using is pretty thin out of the pot, so it's ending up acting like a wash, meaning that the darker areas of the hair are more opaque than the upper areas of the hair. And I'm not going to base coat this until the whole thing is opaque. I'm just going to let the base coat be this way and then wash over it. And then after subsequent layers of paint, you're not even going to notice the fact that my original base coat was not fully opaque. This is another time-saving technique that you can do sometimes. You maybe shouldn't do it all the time, but you don't have to always get full coverage on every single base coat, especially in something textured like hair. The reason why I'm not washing the brown leather part and the ruffles and also the tentacles is because they're so small that they don't necessarily need the wash, but also I'm base coating them colors that are relatively dark that can operate as the darkest shadow already, and then I can highlight up from there. With the other parts, I'm starting with a mid-tone and then washing it and bringing it down and then applying highlights and bringing it back up. I'm starting in the middle, I'm working down, I'm working up. With these smaller parts, I'm starting at the bottom and working all the way up. So I don't need to wash them because I'm already applying the darkest color. Another good reason to base coat everything before starting to work on other areas, in addition to letting your shades dry, is that you get a good idea for your overall scheme before you invest too much time in a color on a certain part of the miniature that might not end up working so great. So when I base coat everything, I can see it all right before me and I can make a decision whether or not I'm headed in the right direction. I'm painting this little black collar last in between the brown leather part and the white cloth area because I'm going to get both brown paint and white paint on this little collar section. So once I'm done base coating those two areas, I can then come back in and clean up the division between those two colors with the black paint, and then it looks nice and clean. So then I was base coating the tentacles, just painting along, minding my own business, and then disaster struck.
Whoa!
Whenever something like this happens, one way to solve it is just to get a bunch of water and a clean brush and just flood the surface with water and then soak it up either with paper towel or with a damp brush. And that's what I did here, and that got rid of pretty much all of the paint spillage. So after base coating, I moved into highlighting, and the first highlights that I put down was on the white cloth. And the problem with washing a white primer is that you don't know what color to base coat on top of it. It's easy when you put a color down that is an actual color in a bottle, and then you wash it, you just kind of clean up that wash with the color you used originally. But in this case, we're creating a new color by washing a white tone with a sepia wash. So I kind of just did my best guess and grabbed Screaming Skull from Citadel and started to clean up that first layer of color on the miniature. This basically just kind of cleans up areas where the wash shouldn't have gotten and makes some of the areas look more smooth. But then progressively added more and more white, and I was focusing my highlights more toward the top of the miniature, toward the shoulders and the top of the arms. At the very end, I was using pure white right out of the bottle, no thinning at all. And this allows me to move faster. Instead of having to apply multiple thin coats of white, I'm applying pure thick white from scale 75 without any dilution. And this gets me pretty much instantaneous opacity. It goes without saying, however, that you need to be kind of careful when you're doing this because you can really easily have kind of a chunky look. So I'm applying it very sparingly, very thickly, but only to the very upper parts of the shoulder. Now I'm going to move on to the face. The face we base coated with kislev flesh, so I'm going to clean it up with kislev flesh, kind of put that first layer down to get an idea of what the face looks like, where the volumes are, what kind of face she's making, if it's a grimace, if it's a mile-long stare. I'm avoiding the eyelids, however, with this first pass of kislev flesh. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to paint the eyes an off-white, not pure white, but an off-white, and then I'm going to paint the pupils. And inevitably, when you're painting the eyes in this way, you are going to get some black on the skin tone. So after I'm done with the eyes, I'll come back with the skin tone and then kind of clean up the border between the eye and the skin tone by painting the eyelid. This is why I didn't highlight it at first and I did it after I did the eye. I suppose you could just paint the eyes first, but I like to get an idea of what kind of facial features the miniature has before I go and do the eye. Sometimes the facial feature can kind of guide you with how you should do the eyes, whether it's staring off to the side, staring front on, whether doing small pupils or large pupils, etc. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to highlight the face, and I'm just simply mixing an off-white into my skin tone, which was kislev flesh, and I'm also mixing a little bit of very bright electric green into the skin tone, and very sparingly. And my intention here is to make the miniature look sickly. So the green in the paint, which I'm using is autumn green from scale 75, is going to counteract the red in the skin tone. It's going to make it more of a grayish, dead color. So that's what I'm hoping for, kind of a sickly looking person. Maybe some green could even show through. I'm focusing my highlights on the top to the cheekbones, the eyebrows, the bridge of the nose, the under part of the chin, the upper lip, the bottom lip. Sometimes what can happen during the course of painting the face is you can kind of run over some of the shadows that you put in intentionally, and you need to kind of bring them back to bring definition to the face. So this happened with me around the eye and the eyelid. So I came back in with a scourge brown, which is a dark reddish brown color, and I kind of traced the eye and the eyelid area to bring definition back to those spots so that you could see all the parts of the face. Now I'm going to move on to highlighting pretty much everything else. I'm going to do it in a similar way because I'm lazy. I'm going to take the original base tone that I had, clean up the washed surface, with that exact same color, and then add off-white to that color to produce a highlight. So in the case for the hair, I am taking snakebite leather and old Citadel paint and adding off-white to it, and then making a highlight and applying that highlight in several passes to the hair. And since, again, this is a higher detail on the model, we are using more highlights and brighter highlights to hopefully draw your face to the miniature as described in the speed painting video. After the hair, moving on to the leather parts, and again, this is the same thing, taking the original brown color, Scourge Brown, and then mixing in off-white to get kind of almost a pinkish brown color, creating highlights and highlighting according to how high the detail is on the miniature. So the collar around her face should be getting more highlights than the leather on her forearms. And then finally, the blue skirt is only getting another cleanup layer of the original base coat and no extra highlights because it is one of the lower details on the miniature. And this is how we save time in a speed paint. And with that final little bit of highlighting done, this miniature was completed at 1 hour and 49 minutes and 56 seconds. So hilariously, I ended up taking longer on the miniature that I was supposed to go faster on. I thought I was going to be faster because I remember the speed painting methodology taking a little bit longer, something more along the lines of 2 or 2.5 hours when I was speed painting the characters from the others, maybe about a year ago. But now that I've returned to it, maybe I've gotten a little bit better at painting, a little bit faster, know how to cut more corners. That method also improved in speed. I do like the second miniature better than the first one, particularly in the skin tone when you're using a warm wash for the skin tone as opposed to a brown wash. You get a little bit more of a human looking face. I also like how the wash on the cloth worked as opposed to being incredibly strong with the Armor Painter Strong Tone. It was a little bit weaker and the shadow wasn't as dark. Similarly, on the blue dress, the shadow isn't as strong and awkward looking. It's a little bit more subtle, so it looks a little bit more realistic. I think there's more to this idea that could be discovered, the idea of parallelizing your work such that you are always painting something and never waiting for anything to dry or drying anything with a hair dryer. It's always doing it manually and you're always working on something new. I think there's some more that can be discovered here and some bolts that can be tightened to the point where you can paint a miniature and get a good result in under an hour. So much of speed painting is just deciding when you want to be done painting a part of a miniature. There are probably several times when I was painting this mini that I could have just stopped and just been like, okay, that's enough, save time, move on to something else. Or there could have been times where I could have used a highlight that was more stark instead of having so many intermediate layers of color. I could have just jumped straight to the brightest one, get the contrast that I want, maybe not necessarily the transitions that I want. It's really a balancing act. How much effort and how much work do you want to put into a certain part of the miniature to get a nice result? Speed painting is an incredibly satisfying thing to do. You get a miniature done really quickly and you get to see a nice result at the end of 1 hour or 2 hours, and it gives you a really nice good feeling. It can sometimes be a slog to paint a miniature. It takes somewhere between 20 and 50 hours to not see that end result. So this can really help to kind of motivate you to continue to paint. So if you've got any board game miniatures laying around from Cool Mini or not, maybe a few cultists or something like that, give speed painting a try. It can really be a lot of fun. If you've missed the first video about speed painting, you can find a link to it in the top right hand corner. If you're curious about the tools that I'm using in the course of this video, the paintbrush, the airbrushes, or the paints that I'm using, you can find links to those products in the description below. If you like the channel and you want to support it, I have a Patreon account with a bunch of fun rewards. I have a merchandise store that has a bunch of cool things like maybe cutting mats if they're not sold out, coffee mugs, patches, and also t-shirts like this one with the cool undead white on it. And I also have another t-shirt with just my normal logo on it. All that stuff is linked in the description below. Subscribe or die! And most importantly, don't forget to paint more minis!